So check out my new self-heating battery. It's not what you think. We're not using the stove to heat up the battery. This has an internal source that will heat the battery up when it reaches a certain temperature of cold outside. And in today's video, I'm gonna be reviewing the LiTime 12v 200Ah self-heating lithium iron phosphate battery. And I'm gonna be pairing it with the LiTime 60A MPPT. This is capable of running 12v, 24, 36, and 48v. Today we're gonna be setting it to 12v because our battery is a 12v 200Ah battery. And before I start testing, I think it's important that I explain to you what I got going on here. We'll start from the battery up to the inverter, and then we'll talk about the MPPT down to the battery. All right, so from the battery, we have our positive line coming into this switch right here that then feeds this bar, that then comes from that bar over here to this fuse, appropriately sized. You'll have to figure that out for your system. And then it comes up to our inverter, all right? We also have a shunt that's connected to the positive that's gonna power the shunt. And we'll get more into that on the negative side. So we have the negative side running in to the shunt, and then that shunt is running into a box right here that then feeds that little display screen at the top. From there, it's connected to this bar. Then the negative goes into our inverter, and a negative runs up to our charge controller. From the positive side down from the charge controller, we have a positive wire that's coming in to a breaker. That breaker then feeds in to this bus bar. Then the bus bar runs back to the switch and it goes to our battery. And that's how we charge the battery with the MPPT. Then we have a breaker that runs out to a solar system on the outside, and we got everything hooked up and ready to go. We're gonna start flipping some switches and turn everything on. And to turn this type of system on, all I need to do is turn the array on that powers our MPPT, and then come down and turn on our battery switch. Now that'll turn on the inverter. We have a switch on the inverter that will turn on, and we're completely powered up. And a little side note, if you're interested in the battery, the MPPT, the inverter, or any of these parts that are in this video, I'll have a link in the description below so you can find those really easy. And I'll also have a discount code, especially on the LiTime products here. We can just ignore the AC box because this is a testing center that I use for other tests. We don't have anything hooked to our AC box in this scenario. Typically, I have a breaker on the inside that is connected to that plug down the bottom, but we're just gonna be using the side plugs on the side of the inverter for the testing today. And there is one more thing that I need to show you on the outside, and that's the solar array that we're using to charge up the MPPT that charges up the battery. That is 2 panels, 400 watt Aptos solar panels that are bifacial. We're not getting much gain the way they're set up, so 400 watts is completely within reason of what the recommendation is on the solar input on this MPPT. On 12 volts, the maximum is 900 watts. So if you're hooking up a 24 volt or 36 volt or 48 volt system, which this can handle all of those, you want to make sure that you understand what's the maximum amount of wattage on your array that you can feed into the MPPT. So let's go take a look at the solar system that I have built on the outside. So we have one wire connected here, and then one wire connected here, running up through that window. I do want to highlight the MPPT because it's important to note there is one cool feature that I like about this one, and it's got a built-in Bluetooth communicator that communicates with the app that you can download, the LiTime app, and you can see everything that's going on and control this MPPT from an app, which is really cool. It actually gives you data over time in charts. So I'll have that over here on the side so you can see what I'm talking about. And it's really simple to set up. You basically open up the app, you connect the Bluetooth to it. It happens seamlessly. I really like the overall functionality of this MPPT. If you don't need anything over 60 amps, I would really recommend this one. I've been using this for just a little bit. So far, I'm pretty impressed with it. It just works. There's nothing that's failed on it. Everything that I've put it through the paces has worked well. As I'm doing the capacity test, I'm gonna do my best to test out the BMS in this and see if it will protect the battery. Let's see if we can overload the battery before we overload the inverter and see which one shuts off first. I think we might be able to shut the battery down before the inverter because we have a surge up to 7,000 watts on that. And what we're gonna be using is some old appliances. An old just small oven that should run somewhere around 1,400 watts or so. Then we have one of these 1980 sandwich makers that I remember as a kid, and it's pushing right around 640 watts. And then we have the old trusty heat gun that pushes upwards of 1,500 watts. So that should be enough to shut down the BMS. You would never run all of these at the same time anyway, but we need to find out if things work the way they're supposed to be working. We want to turn this off because it's feeding power down through this. So all we got to do here is click. Just come over here and turn this switch off. Now you'll see that that's off. No power can be supplied other than what the battery is. The next thing we want to do is go over here and go down to the bottom and reset everything. So everything's reset. All of our equipment's turned off. We need to turn the inverter on and let these appliances drain that battery. So the first thing I want to start with is the oven, because I know it's going to pull more power than basically anything up here. So we're going to turn it to bake, and then we're going to go to 120 minutes because we want this to run the entire time if possible. So 120, we'll start this up and see what's going on our monitor. That's saying that we're pulling 1,735 watts. Let's just say 1,735. Now I think the next thing that I should use is the heat gun because I can control a little bit better. And I know I'm going to get that into that 2,000 watts. This may actually be enough to put it over where it'll start beeping and be annoying, but it eventually will kick it off because the BMS is telling it's being overloaded. So let's start with this. There, we already got it. So let's see if we can kick off the BMS and we'll see where we're at with the terms of power. There it was, it just went pop. Actually, I think I blowed a 200 amp fuse. I should have had that size a little bigger, but I'm pretty sure I just popped the fuse. Oh yeah. So you can see it's clearly burnt out. And that's a good example of why you put inline fuses in, because that protects the battery and the inverter, and it actually protects the electrical system in general. So that shut this system down because we were overloading it, and I had forgotten that I had a 200 amp inline on there, and I don't have a 250 or 300 on hand. So I am glad that that happened so you guys can see it. So I want to share that with you. But I'm not going to try to press this battery any further. I'm going to put another 200 amp fuse in there, and we're just going to run an appliance and do the capacity test. And that's why we put protections in place, is to protect ourselves when we're doing stupid shit. So that was stupid. I should have thought better on the fuse itself, but it's a good example of what could happen if you didn't have that in there and the BMS failed in your battery or something failed in your inverter, then you got a fire going on. That's why you put these protections in place. And we're looking for that number to be at 200 or over 200 amp hours to pass our capacity test. But screw it. I actually am going to overload this because you come to my videos because you want to see those type of things. You want to see real life testing, and I want to make sure that the BMS in this battery does what it says it's supposed to do. First thing that I want to do is turn the system back off, take this cap off. We're going to remove this and this, and we're going to add this cable directly to the inverter, bypassing everything we have going on here. And we will find out if that BMS will protect the battery. I just think it's not fair to you guys if I didn't do that test. As I got thinking about it through the capacity test, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that test whether it destroys the battery or not. because you have the right to know if that BMS actually does work or not. And now that we have the shunt set up, the inverter turned on, I'm gonna turn the oven on first, then we'll turn on the heat gun, and we're looking for this to go well over 200 amps to shut down the BMS that's in the battery. Now we'll turn the heat gun on. We'll turn it all the way up. And we're running at 255 amps. We'll see how long that lasts like that. This should start shutting down the BMS at some point. Sometimes you gotta run them for a couple minutes for it to shut it down. And I really don't wanna wait a couple minutes, so I'm gonna toss in this one. Oh, I heard that. Now we're at 290 amps. And we're right at the limit of the inverter. Somewhere I read that this was a 200 amp BMS. And as I'm looking in the product manual, it's telling me it's a 100 amp BMS. Now, there's a problem because I have just ran this for several minutes running close to 300 amps, and the top of this battery is pretty hot. Right here it says max discharge for 5 seconds is 280 amp hours. See it right here? That's a problem because that BMS did not shut down in that 5 seconds. Right now, the top of this case is really hot. Let me see if I can get a thermal scan of this top. And it's been setting for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. We'll see if how hot that is. I mean, I can actually feel warping right here, right now. I can feel a bubble right there. And it's kind of sunk in right here. I don't know if I can capture that on camera or what's going on. Probably can't capture that. I can't even see it by eye. But yeah, I wish you could feel this. I mean, it is hot. So the BMS failed. So once again, let's turn the system back on and finish our capacity test. And that's a shame that the BMS didn't work. Now all I'm trying to complete is the capacity test. I do think LiTime will get that fixed, but I think they're gonna have to send me a new battery when they get that problem fixed, so I confirm that it's fixed, because at this point, I won't be able to recommend this version of their battery. Every other version that I've tested has been great and all that stuff worked. But something just told me to complete that BMS test, and I am so glad I did that because I want to be as honest as possible with you all when I'm testing these products out. And now that we're getting at 200 amp hours, we just reached it. We want to turn this off because that's pulling too much of a load. So I'm setting a little bit over 200 amps and we have a 200 amp hour battery. So the capacity test passes above and beyond. I believe we could probably squeeze out 204 on this if we go really slow to squeeze it out. But we took it up to 200 amps with full power on the oven. So that's a plus. It's a shame that the BMS didn't work like I would expect it to. If LiTime can get that fixed and send me a new battery, and I can verify that that BMS actually has been upgraded or updated to work where you put it under a load for that 5 seconds and it would shut off the battery, then I would be able to recommend this, because everything else about the battery I do like. It's the BMS really does concern me because it should have protected it from that type of load that I put on it earlier. So if you learned something in this video, or if you would just like to leave me a comment, leave it below and I'll be sure to respond. I hope to catch you in my next video.